message. So you might already have heard the automated message behind me that the recording is in progress. And this time we're going to focus on what's new in Hale Studio with a focus on the European Noise Directive. Now, this was started off in 2002 with a relatively small sphere. I believe at the time it was based on the noise around industrial machines. But naturally, as things have developed, that snowballed into quite a directive and data has only gotten more complex. We also saw in our network, in our market specifically, that END transformations tended to be quite complex. And we wanted to shed some light on that and also just join that up with a basic introduction to Hale Studio 4.1, which is the latest release of our open source tool for ETL data transformations. Next slide, please. So a brief overview of the agenda. I'm going to give you the company description, introduce you to what exactly this webinar is going to do, and then Kate's going to take over. She's the product manager here, and she's going to give you a walkthrough of what exactly Hale Studio is. There's new in Hale Studio 4.1, some of the more specific things, and then we're going to jump into a live demo of using GeoPackages in Hale Studio 4.1 with a focus on the European Noise Directive. Then we'll move into the summary, and then there will be time for Q&A. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do happen to have any questions, feel free to use the chat functionality or the Q&A functionality. Okay, next slide, please. So a very brief introduction to WeTransform. I see that some of the attendees here are new. Some of them are, well, our seasoned webinar attendees. And to give you a quick introduction, we were based in Darmstadt. We started off about five years ago with the mission of building green data ecosystems. We already have more than 100 customers and over 4,000 users. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see some of our clientele, and you can really see it's quite international. We have two programs. One is the Hale Studio program, which is the open source software for data transformation, which this webinar is going to be focused on. And we also have Hale Connect, which is our integrated and automated data platform that's focused on Inspire, but also on data publishing. Generally, we've been involved in the data interoperability side of things. That's been something that we've been really good at. And seeing how things have been moving with Inspire and END and so on, we continue to work in these spaces quite extensively, but we also have the larger goal of maintaining and building green data ecosystems to promote the EU Green Deal. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into those aspects because this webinar is about Hale Studio. So at this point, Kate, I can hand it over to you, and please feel free to go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kate, and yeah, today I'll be going over some of the newest functionality that was released with the latest release, major release of Hale Studio 4.1.0. So first I'll go over a few of those new features that have been introduced there, and then I will move into a live demo of a transformation project which will transform END shapefiles and Excel files to the new END reporting format, which is GeoPackage. Right. Okay. Can you see my screen, Akshat?
Yes, I can see the presentation for what's new in 4.1.
Okay, super. Okay. All right. So one of the new features that we've added is support for the selection of multiple files during the schema and the data import. For longtime users of Hale Studio, you may know that when you want to load more than one, for example, more than one shapefile, that you have to load the shapefile, then once you're finished with that, navigate back on disk and select the next shapefile and so forth. In 4.1.0, that's no longer necessary, so you can load multiple shapefile schemas or multiple GML files, for example. You still cannot load multiple XML schemas, I mean, that's still not possible, but it's very helpful for loading multiple files. For example, if you loaded 2 shapefiles, you could just load the 2 schemas at once, and then you wanted to load the data for them, you can now just load them both at the same time instead of having to do it multiple times. So that's again, a lot of the new features in this release are really basic improvements to some very common workflows in Hale Studio. This has also been one of the most requested features for Hale Studio, that is the ability to remove a single schema from Hale Studio. So in the past, if you had this issue where you wanted to remove a schema, you would have to clear the data and clear the project in order to remove the schema. Now in 4.1, you no longer have to do that. You can simply, when you're in Hale Studio, navigate to the project view, which is shown here, then click on the schema, and you will have the option to delete it, and that will remove it from your project. This dialog to remove a schema, it will only appear if you don't have data loaded in that schema. So if you're wondering maybe why you can't see it, if you have data loaded into the schema, then you won't have this option. So if you then just clear the data, you'll then have this option available to remove a single schema. And again, this option is only available through the project view in Hale Studio. So that has also been a highly requested function to be able to remove a schema from a project. In the past, sometimes we would even go in and edit the halex file, for example, to do this. So now you can do that easily here. Okay. With the new release, we also now support the export of source and transform data to shapefile. So this is useful for exporting different formats: XML, GML, CSV, GeoPackages, for example. Any of these files, if they have geometries, you can now export those to shapefile. And if you take the use case of GML, for example, if you would export a GML file with multiple feature types to shapefile, then there will be one shapefile created for every feature type. So if you were working with a GML schema and you had data populated in multiple feature types in that schema, and you wanted to export to shapefile, then there would be one shapefile per feature type created. It's also a very useful function. And again, you see this when you click on File Export Data. Okay. We've also added in 4.1 the END schema presets. These are the new schema presets. These are the GeoPackage encodings. So END, for those of you maybe not less familiar with noise reporting, the END stands for the Environmental Noise Directive. This is EU legislation that mandates every 5 years that EU member states report noise data. And these new GeoPackage encodings are the new required format for reporting that noise data. We transform, in particular, Torsten Heitz, he has been at the center of this new encoding implementation, and has created these along with others. And so we've added them here as presets, which you can load directly now when you're working in Hale Studio. So when you select import schema and you go to presets, you'll see in the menu now a new folder called European Noise Directive. When you expand that, you have access to all of the new GeoPackage encodings for the END data deliverables. So you can see those here, there are quite a few. And we are going to take a look at mapping to GeoPackage. Today we'll look at the END DF48 workflow major roads. and we'll complete a mapping using this GeoPackage schema. Okay. All right. And finally, in terms of notable new features added in 4.1, spatial indices for GeoPackage were added. So there's now support for spatial index creation when you're writing GeoPackage files. There's several different options you'll see. You can choose different spatial index approaches. However, we recommend just, we actually recommend leaving it at the default, which is R2 spatial index. Because even the NGA geometry index, it also in the documentation recommends using R-tree. So that's what we have set as the default, but there is a drop-down list to select. Okay. All right, so now I'd like to move into a live demo in Hale Studio 4.1 and show you how to use the new GeoPackage schemas that we have there. So just to give you a brief summary of what we'll be looking at today, we're going to create END conformant GeoPackage. So again, as I mentioned here, the END GeoPackage schemas, they are available for you in Hale Studio. And what we're going to do is we're going to transform some source data. It's a mixture of data from different sources, the shape files, Excel files, some mapping tables. And we're going to transform that data to the new GeoPackage encoding. This is an example here. And we're going to focus on road data from Austria. Okay, so if you're interested in getting more into this yourself, there's really a lot of resources available for you to download and take a look at yourself if you're interested, or if you're interested maybe in some different data flows other than what we're looking at today. There is all of these examples, the Hale Studio transformation projects, sample data, all of the schemas, everything you need to get going. It's all available in this open source GitHub repository. So it includes source data, the alignments, the schemas, everything you need to take a look at the different workflows. And perhaps John and Akshat can share with you the link. I put it here on the slide. So also the project we'll be working with today, although we'll be going through it step by step, you also could download it here. And I also have to say as well, on the EEA's website, there's also a lot of new resources available there, different videos which clearly describe the different mapping in the different workflows as well. So lots of online resources available. Okay, and with that, I think I will launch into the demo unless there's any questions at this point.
There was one question already. Why is there a specific export to SQLite instead of a generic export to JDBC, which would support any database?
We do have a paid plugin for JDBC connection. So so I mean, we have something called Hale Studio plugins. Actually, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that. I mean, if you want to connect to JDBC resources in Hale Studio or Esri file geodatabases, we do have paid pro plugins for that. I can just go quickly to the help here. Let me see. So do we have the pro package? Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if we want to provide a link to that and looking at different Hale Studio.
Yeah, so to quickly summarize that, yes, that is a possibility as a paid plugin, and I can forward a link to that in the general chat.
It says here, yeah, Oracle Database Reader Writer and FileGeo Database Reader.
Mhm.
The question.
There's one more question, but I would actually propose that we get to that question at the end of the webinar. And for now, we get through the demo, the
Okay.
live demo.
Okay. Sure. Then, a moment. Okay, sorry. Here we go. So we're here. Okay. So before we get started, I'm just going to quickly show you the source data we'll be working with today. So I'm going to navigate first to QGIS and just show you what the data looks like. So as you can see, this is Austria, and this is the source shapefile. One of the source shapefiles we'll be working with. We can just zoom into an area. We see these are in fact noise contours for major roads. So this is the source data that we'll be transforming to the end directive today. Just want to show you that. And we'll also be working with some data in CSV format. So again, these are the data tables that you would typically expect to see with END data. So again, there's several tables here in this Excel document. So we'll also be importing this data as well to transform it in Hale Studio. Okay. All right. So this data set is quite large. So the first thing we're going to do is set instance sampling. In our project, we recommend using instance sampling when you're working with very large data sets because it just takes a long time to load and to process really large data sets. So we always recommend working in Hale Studio with a subset of the data so that you can see your results and look at what you've done. So I'm going to start with that. I'll click on Window, Settings. And then I'm going to go to Project and Source Data. And here you can see I'm going to set click this check mark, use a subset of the imported source data as specified below. First, n instances per type. You can select here a choice or every nth instance per type. And then I'm setting it at 500. So I'll only load 500 features of all of the data. Click line close. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start by loading the source shapefiles, the LDEN and the LNIGHT. So for those of you maybe who aren't reporting END data, LDEN and LNIGHT simply provide information about the time when the noise data was collected. So LDEN is the daytime and LDEN is the nighttime. So I'll go ahead and load first the shapefile data. I'm going to click on Import Source Schema. Okay, let's see if we can go ahead and use that new functionality that I spoke about earlier from multiple files. So see if I have them here. No, I haven't loaded them lately. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and browse. Okay. And I'll take a look here. Okay, so my two shape files is going to be AT, Austria, major roads for daytime. And I'll take AT, M road, and light. Open. Now you can see here, if I scroll, I can see I have the two files there. And let's click next and finish. Okay, so you see this is actually this new 4.1 functionality in action. So in previous versions, you wouldn't be able to load two files at once, two schemas at once. So we'll just take a look at those. Here we have country ID, dB high, dB low. This is the number of the decibels for that noise data, the file name, and the geometry. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead, now that I've loaded the two schemas, now I'm going to go ahead and load the source data. Okay, so I'm going to click on File, Import Source Data. Okay, and again, I'll try from multiple files. Okay, and now I'm going to load the two shapefiles once again to load the source data. Click Open. Next. Type on okay. Next, finish, and maybe I didn't. Okay, take that. Oops. Let me just clean that with. Do that one more time. File, import the source data. I shouldn't put the just one feature type there. Okay, so I'm going to take that one and this one. Next. Next, finish. Don't want to load them. Okay. Yes, there we go. So if I just choose one feature type name, it loads them all into that feature type name. So I didn't want to do that. I want 500 in each shapefile instance. Okay, so now let's take a look at the map view. We'll just take a look at the data that are loaded here. In order to view the geometries in the map view, you just simply right click it, select set as default geometry, and we can navigate to the map view and take a look what we've loaded. Okay, and again, this is appearing on the source data side. I have a split screen map view where I have source data displaying on the left-hand side, and I have transformed data showing on the right-hand side. So here you can see, again, we're just working with a subset of the data. And you can see it appears I have some features there loaded in Austria. Here. Okay. All right, so that looks good. I'll go back to my default view. All right. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and load the Excel file that we need. So the actual data that we need to map as well on the source data side. So I'm going to be loading an Excel file. I need to load several of the tables in that file. I'll go ahead and do that now. On File, Import, Source Schema. Okay, I'll click File, and we want to look at, I better maybe perhaps close this first. Okay, I click on Excel file, and next. Okay, so now I have to select the sheet that I'd like to import from my Excel file. So as I showed you earlier, this is an XLS notebook that has several different sheets in it that has the END reporting data in it. So what I'm going to do now is load each table that I need for the mapping. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Eurostat unit reference. So again, this will include information about whether you're aggregating your data by local administrative unit or by the NUTS administrative boundaries. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I can leave the data types as is because Studio will sort that out. I will now click Finish. We should see the values there. I'll click File, Import, Source Schema. Next, I'm going to load the exposure major roads data. And there we see these columns that will be there. Click File, Import, Source Schema. Now I'll go ahead and import the exposure values. Click Finish. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and load the data for that. Source data. Okay, let me try from multiple files. That's not from multiple. Oops. This here. Next. I'm going to select skip first line because the first row in the table is column headings. Next, and finish. Okay, so that's correct. We just have one instance. Next, I'm going to import source data from the next table. Exposure major road. And next I will import the source data from the exposure value. I think I oops, sorry. I think that I have now accidentally exposure major road. Yeah, unfortunately, I have not loaded the correct data for exposure major road. I accidentally did not choose so let me just say clear. Let me just do this quickly, clean source data. Sorry about that, I'll just have to reload that quickly. Okay, I didn't select the correct table name for the exposure data. Import the source data for the two shape files. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to go through one more time and load the source data here for the Excel table. Oops. So, okay, finish, yes. So that's the Eurostat data. You have to select the table name twice. Unfortunately, I didn't do that for the next one here. Import source data. For exposure major road. Here, exposure major road, finish. Yes, now I have 26 instances. So that's correct. And lastly, import source data for the exposure value. Okay. Next, exposure value and finish. Okay. So now we have all of our source data loaded. So we have two shapefiles, and we have 3 sheets out of our Excel table. Okay, so next I'm going to start with the mapping. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is load our target schema, and that is the END GeoPackage schema for major roads. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on File, Import, Target Schema. I'm going to select from preset. I'll click to select. And here you can see there's now a folder that's titled European Noise Directive. Now I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to select END DF4_8 major roads. Okay, because what we have here is major roads noise data. Now click finish. And this will load the GeoPackage European Noise Directive application schema for the workflow DF48 major roads. So this is a GeoPackage schema. It's a collection of tables. So we're going to go ahead and start mapping. So first thing we'll do is we're going to retype one of the shape files, Austrian major roads LDEN, to noise contours major roads LDEN. So I'm going to click on the first shapefile we have loaded, and I'm going to retype it to noise contours major roads including agglomerations LDEN. And I'll select retype. Next, finish. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to expand this. Okay, so you can see it's much more simpler schema. We have category, ID, location, shows the geometry, measure time, begin and end position, and source. So we'll go ahead and map those now. The first thing we'll do is create generate a sequential ID on ID. Okay, so unlike in Inspire, the GeoPackage IDs are not necessarily persistent IDs, so we're going to use the function generate sequential ID. I'm going to click on the function selector and select generate sequential ID. Generate sequential ID will create sequential ID. However, every time you open a transformation project, every time you rerun the transformation project, or every time you import new data, that the IDs could be different. So we'll select one per target instant type. Finish. Then we would expect here 500 IDs. So if we take a look at that, click on ID, we look at the occurring values of the IDs that have been populated. Here we can see sequential IDs starting at 1, and so to 500. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we will map the geometry. So we're going to click on the left-hand side in the shapefile, click on the geometry, select location, and we'll do a retype. Rename. It's a property level version of retype. Click next and finish. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to perform a classification on category. So we want to map some values that are in dB low in the source data to different values in the field category in the target schema. So in order to do that, we're going to load a lookup table that we can then load into our classification function to reclassify the values. So first of all, I'm going to load the classification table for major roads ELD. I'm going to click File, Import, Lookup Table. From File, I'll navigate to the file. And here I'm going to select Category, ELD Classification, and click Open. Next. Name, I'll just call it, let's see, dB low to category 10. Okay, next. Okay, so take a look at what we have here. Select if the first row contains headlines. That's true, so I'm going to select yes. Okay, so you see now what we have in the source and what we have in the target. So what this means is that when a value of 35 is found in the source data, that will be then the target field will be populated with this value. So it's a remap table, classification table. I'll click Finish. Okay, and now what we can do is go ahead and use that table directly in a classification function. So what we're going to do is click on the left-hand side here, dB low. In the source schema, we'll click on category in the target, and from the function selector, I'm going to choose classification. Select next. And now there's a lot of options in this dialog. You can choose to click the green plus to load all of the occurring source values, and then for your target values, you could manually type them in. But you can also use a file, load the values directly from file. So I'm going to load our lookup table that we just added to the project here. And I'll click Finish. Okay, and so then we should see those values in category. There we go. Okay. All right. So now the next thing we're going to do is populate the source. Again, the source will have the same value. Yes, we'll have the same value for both LDEN and LNight. So we want to just use an assign for that. We'll just assign this. Going to assign this value because the same value applies to all instances in the data here. Click next, and the source will be attributed with major roads, including agglomeration, and we'll click Finish. Okay, so that's really our completed noise contour mapping. We're going to go ahead and repeat the process more or less for LNight. Okay, so again, we're going to go ahead, click on ID and select Generate Sequential ID. Next, and Finish. First, we want to map it. We want to retype it. So again, of course, we want to select the LNight shapefile and retype it to noise contours, major roads, including agglomeration, LNight. I'll just do that quickly, retype. Next, and Finish. Okay, so now that I've mapped the type level property, I'll move back into the properties. So here I have the ID. Next, we'll do location. So again, now working on M-Road LNight, I'll take the geometry from that shapefile and map it to the location here using rename. Okay, and again, we'll use another classification function on category. Again, I need to use a different mapping table because there are different range values used here. So I'll load that lookup table file, import lookup table. And this is category Elm Light classification, lookup table, name, say TP low, category. Right. And a DB low 2 category, light. Okay, next. Take a look at these. Okay. So I'm going to select that the first row does in fact contain headlines. Otherwise, that looks good. I'll click finish. Okay, so now that lookup table is loaded. Now I can go ahead and use that in my classification function. So again, in the light shapefile, I'm going to select DB low. Then I'll select category. Then I'm going to select classification. Next, from file, and I'll select my lookup table, light, and click finish. And so finally, I want to populate the source with, again, sign with the major roads, including agglomeration, and click finish. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save that quickly. Save. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and map the tables that we loaded from the Excel file. So this is quite straightforward. We're going to map the Eurostat unit reference to the table with the same name. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to do a structural retype. I'm going to click retype. A structural retype attempts to, well, it doesn't attempt, a structural retype will map any attributes or any properties that have the same name. So not only will a structural retype map the type level instances over, a structural retype will also populate all child properties that have the same name as the source data. So here we can use this to quickly populate, quickly do this mapping so that you don't have to map every property individually. So if I set these to true, so again, this does not happen by default. A structural retype is something you have to specify here in this dialog, structural rename. Click finish. And then you'll see that not only the type level is mapped, but that the two properties that contain data are also created as well there. So you see these attributes share the same name as the source data. So they are populated. Okay, so that looks good. Now I'm just going to assign quickly here an ID. Assign. Next one, that's fine, and finish. Okay, and so I can continue here as well and quickly using the same approach. The structural rename, I'll quickly map the last two tables. So we'll do the same for exposure major road. Exposure major road. I'll do a retype. Again, using the structural rename. Finish. And there you can see again, multiple attributes there mapped. Okay, again, we're going to generate here a sequential ID on the exposure major road table. Generate sequential ID, Next and finish. Okay, and finally, we will do the same for exposure value. So I'm going to click on exposure value table, click retype, and we'll do again a structural rename and finish. And last but not least, we have to again generate an ID. I'm going to apply to the ID, generate sequential ID function, and click finish. Okay, perfect. So what we have now here is we have here now a fully mapped END conformant geopackage with the one caveat that a fully conformant END geopackage will need to have the codeless properties and the data set default properties, which are some tables which contain some default values. What we recommend in order to create a 100% END conformant geopackage is to now export your transform data here into the END GeoPackage template. So these templates are available freely for download. And so if you export now your transform data directly into the GeoPackage template, you will have these default tables pre-populated for you properly. So just to save yourself a little extra effort. So that's what we'll go ahead and do now. So what I'm going to do is export my mapped data here into the END GeoPackage template, a blank template, which does have the default tables populated as required. So I'm going to select here File, Export, Transform Data. Then I would select GeoPackage File, next, and browse to my GeoPackage. So the DF48 GeoPackage templates. As you can see here, we have GeoPackage templates that are available for all of the major workflows. I'll select the major roads, save, and next. And then don't forget to convert your geometries to the required CRS, in this case 3035. Okay, and next. And here you have the option to create a spatial index for your GeoPackage. We recommend doing that even if you don't think that you need it. And we'll click finish. And we're getting close on time. And with that, I think I would hand it back to Akshat for summary and questions. So that is the workflow.
That sounds pretty good. Thanks a lot for that demo, Kate. I found that quite insightful myself. We had quite a few questions come in. And before that, I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the key learnings from this webinar. Next slide, please. So we found that this new version updates simplified common workflows for the end user. This includes things such as multiple file uploads, and we've made these updates on the basis of customer feedback and also on basis of feedback from the experts that have been using Hale Studio from its conception over 5 years ago. Now, the END GeoPackage schema presets, they support implementers seeking to comply also with the EA data delivery obligations. And we've seen this kind of a combination come up pretty often, that people with one data schema also want to go in with EA data delivery obligations. And we really wanted to make sure that you guys can also be a part of that and do these things as effortlessly as possible. And of course, this is not going to be the only release that we have. We're going to have quite a couple of new ones, and stay tuned for more of those. You have our email addresses on our website. You can always sign up for our newsletter as well. So feel free to reach out to us in case you want any more information. Now, at this point, we can move into the questions. I see one from Sophia, which was from, I think, the beginning of the webinar when we were talking about the END target predefined schemas. And the question is, why are the target predefined schemas in JSON format? Kate, I think that's something you can answer.
Why are they in GeoPackage?
Why are they in JSON format?
Where do we see that? Let me just see here. Okay. So if we go to import source schemas, or was it a source schema or target schema?
This was target predefined schema.
Target predefined schema.
Yeah.
Okay. These schemas, they are GeoPackage schemas.
I see. Okay, then it's possible that this question was around one of the previous slides that focused on support to export and transform data to shapefiles. I think that's what it meant. But if I'm incorrect, Sophia, please write to us on that. Okay, I think then we can move on to the next question from Julia, which says you have to clear all source data if you mess up one feature type.
Sorry to show you that. Yes. Yeah. So if I want to, if I want to remove, for example, the source data here from one. Now, if I was actually, if I had a project where I'd really done a lot of work to load that, I would edit the hale file to remove it, but unfortunately, yes, that would probably be another candidate to be able to remove individual data files. That this is similar to being able to remove one schema. So same thing. You saw how many schemas I actually loaded here. So I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 source schemas here loaded. It's also troublesome if you mess up and you load a wrong schema and you've just loaded 5 or 10 schemas. So that's why we added that functionality to be able to remove one schema, but the same could be said for source data, being able to then remove one source data source. Yeah.
Okay, and there's a follow-up question to that as well, which touches upon what you just spoke about. But you can remove a single schema if there's no data. Shouldn't you also be able to clear the data from a single schema? I think that directly touches upon what you just spoke about. Yeah.
Yes. I think that would also be great functionality, as you
saw. Something to keep into account for the next release, right? And that's also why we do webinars, so we can get feedback like this from the people that are actually using the tool.
Yes, no, I think it would also be very helpful. Yeah.
And so the next question from Damien, when generating the sequential ID, is it possible to choose if it shall start from 1 or from another number?
That will be in the next release. So I just tested that functionality yesterday. That has been developed, but that will be a part of the next release. So you will be able to choose any number that you'd like the ID to start with, but not 0. 0 will not be allowed, but any number 1 or above, you will be able to choose what number you want to start start the ID at. Yes, so that's definitely coming.
Okay, and we also have a question here from Marian. What formats can be imported to Hale Studio using multiple files import option?
So shapefile, CSV, GML, I mean, any files that share the same scheme, that share similar. So you still can't use that for example, XML files if they don't share the same schema. So yeah, I think it's most useful for, as we saw in this example, shapefile, yeah, GML.
And we would have a complete list of this somewhere in the release notes, right?
Yes, we should have it. We go to help. What's new? 4.1. Yeah. Not sure. Yeah, I'd have to search in the help.
Yeah, I think it might also be on GitHub, but that's something that we can follow up on. So that is a good question. We also have a question from Denada at this point. Is it possible that we edit the attributes after we have saved our project? And how can we do that through Hale if it's possible?
Edit the attributes?
Yes.
No. If you mean the schema, you'd like to edit the schema. I mean, you can edit, of course, the data. If you'd say, no, I don't think here there should be 500 instances. I'd like to do, you want to adjust the number of data through some type of transformation function, but you cannot edit the schemas in Hale Studio. Meaning you could not, for example, you decided you wanted to delete exposed area from this schema, or you wanted to rename exposed area to exposed polygon or something. That is not schema editing is not possible in the UI of Hale Studio here. You would have to edit your schema prior to loading it into Hale Studio.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question. If we're talking about editing the schema, so changing the number of elements or changing the name of elements, this type of schema editing we can't do in the Hale Studio UI. But of course you can change the mappings, of course, then how the data is mapped in Hale Studio between attributes.
Okay, thanks for that. So now we have one question that is based on, I think, maybe it's a bug, I'm not quite sure, but when people try to import the target schema using from preset European noise directives, they sometimes get an error. And Damien said that sometimes it might be due to the firewall. Do you have a comment on that? So the issue is basically importing the target schema from preset in the European noise directive. I'm wondering if this is also a common error that we've heard from other people too, and if there's a solution for this, or is it just firewall? It's a firewall-based solution.
That's a good question. We'll have to take that down and get back. I haven't had that issue. I'm not sure exactly where those GeoPackages are retrieved from, if that's from a local copy, or if they are retrieved from an external location. I would have to take that question and get back. That may very well be, because we have had those types of issues before with some code lists where users in certain organizations cannot access the code lists. Hale Studio due to issues like this, so that could be. We'd have to take that question and absolutely get back on that in terms of where those GeoPackages actually accessed from when accessed in Hale Studio.
Yeah, and I think that if you happen to have questions like this or errors like this coming in, you can also always put this in the discussion forum that we have on our website. We want it exactly for questions like this to come in, that if you guys happen to have these problems, you can post there and we will get back to you. Of course, this is something that's completely free. You'll have our CTO, the very guys who've made Hale Studio, come in and answer that question for you.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty fast. So maybe you
Yeah.
can put a link to that, but yeah, I mean, they're usually answer very quickly. So if you ever have any issues like that, they can help you out very quickly.
Yeah, and now we have another question concerning editing of the schema. Is it possible to save Hale project as XML and edit this XML manually?
So yes, this gets into some, yes. So what you have when you save a Hale Studio transformation project is 3 files. You have 3 files saved, probably I can show you. So if I were to save this as an XML project, I would have, for example, if we look at this, these 3 files, when you save a Hale Studio file, you have a Hale X file, you have an alignment.xml file, and you have the SLD. These 3 files, like a shape file and its parts, these 3 files need to stay together to be a functional Hale Studio project. What is possible is, again, that this gets into very, I think Hale X expert knowledge is how to edit these files. We don't recommend that, but how to edit these files to manipulate what we see in Hale Studio. So, for example, I mentioned if we wanted to remove a source data file, I mean, you would have to know which element to remove from these files in order to achieve that. But that's not something we typically recommend doing, editing this, because there's a high chance that you can do something that corrupts the project. So same with editing a schema. So this is, again, it requires adding some very specific elements to some very specific area in the file. But yes, for example, if you've seen some of our environmental monitoring facilities webinars, we have showed that it's a very in-depth advanced topic where, for example, when we're dealing with like a type, any type that is missing type information, we need to provide a data type to the element to be able to map to it. We can do that in these files. So that's a very specific use case, but typically we don't recommend doing that type of thing through the Hale Studio project files. We do it only if there simply doesn't exist, when there is no schema to handle that use case. So for example, in environmental monitoring facilities where the official schema does not have a data type and a specific element that needs to be mapped, then we add that element there. And again, this would not be the same for every project. It would be different depending on the source data. But that's the only use case there I can think of where we do that. But it's certainly not common, and we don't typically recommend that.
Okay, I think we're over time now. There are no more questions. So at this point, I would like to close the webinar with some concluding remarks. I think that today you guys were very engaged, and that's always nice to see, and also to get your feedback. I also got this smaller question around workshops, that if we will be hosting any Hale Studio workshops and topics related to END and GeoPackages. The answer is that it's in the works, and if any of you are interested in getting a workshop on Hale Studio, we will be happy to set that up for you. Please reach out to us. And of course, the pricing will depend on what your use case is and how many people you'd be getting in there with. So with that.
Yeah, and I would just say to that, any topic is really feasible. I mean, if there's anything, for example, the topic just mentioned, I mean, this is a very in-depth topic that's hard to answer quickly. I think we can support us to do webinars on workshops on just about any topic that people are interested in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to us. I will be following up with some of you via telephone, so don't be afraid if you get a call from a random German number. That's probably going to be me. I'm very interested in how you guys are working with END data. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks for all the questions. It was really great interacting with you as usual, and hear you in your next webinar. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.